our philosophy team, kind of to pull the curtain back, spent a lot of the last month, really 2 months, working on a new way to teach this argument. So the argument itself hasn't changed really. It's more, we're trying to figure out how to teach it in a way that is the most clear, the easiest for you to kind of learn so that you can go and use it. And so you are almost the first group to hear the new approach. There's a group in Ireland that beat you by 2 days. But this is my second chance to kind of show you this thing that we've been working on, because we're constantly in that R&D mode, that research and development, trying to figure out what is working. And so that Equip for Life course that we talk about sometimes, like I'm reshooting the entire module on this argument later this year, because I think we figured out a new, clearer way to teach this. So this is me practicing, basically. Thanks for giving me a chance to practice our new stuff. I will tell you though, I don't have slides, but if you want to take notes, today will be a good day for you to take notes. If you want to grab a pad of paper and a pen or be typing or something like that, I will kind of point out, I'm going to teach you a 4-step process and a few sub-points. So I will call out some things if you just want that extra ability to remember to write it down, or otherwise get the course. And by the end of the year, I'll have posted this process up there on the course. So to set this up, as I said yesterday, I think there are 2 big disagreements between pro-life and pro-choice people. And you would think there'd be more the way that we act, but it really comes down to 2. We don't disagree about whether rape is wrong. We don't disagree about whether all the foster kids ought to get adopted. We don't disagree about whether poverty is a really sad thing that we want to minimize. We don't disagree that back alley abortions, that if women ever died in dangerous illegal abortions, that would be a tragic thing. Don't disagree about that. We disagree about 2 big things. One, the thing that we're going to talk about today, which is whether the unborn is a valuable person. The kind of thing like Liberty and Lois that have the right to life. Or is it something else? Is it something at kind of a lower level, maybe something like a dog that doesn't have equal rights? So that's a big disagreement. And then the other big disagreement that we're not really talking about today, but it has to do with bodily autonomy. The way a lot of pro-choice people tend to argue is they'll kind of say, like, even if you're right about that personhood thing, so you still have the right to have an abortion because of bodily rights. And I know on the Oregon Right to Life YouTube channel, there's a video from a while back of me doing a speech on that topic. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check that out or get it in the course. But what we're going to focus on is that first disagreement, is the unborn a person or not? And it's not so much now a disagreement about whether the unborn is alive or is a human so much anymore. That was debated a lot more like 20, 30 years ago. You'd hear people say a lot of times, no one knows when life begins. I almost never hear that on college campuses today, because the science is out. Like, it's just really, really obvious. Everyone in our generation has seen an ultrasound. It's just really hard at this point with all the technology to say that we don't know when biological life begins. So now when I hear someone on a college campus say, well, we don't know when life begins, or we don't know when a human begins, in my head, I know they probably mean something different than what I'm hearing. Because the pro-life impulse, when you hear that, is to think, oh, they're saying no one knows when biological life begins. Well, that's stupid. Think of all the scientists. Then we start dropping all kinds of mics on them. Here's all the science, all the textbooks. Read it and weep, like that kind of thing. Like, we get really excited sometimes when this gets like, yeah, come at me, bro. Now I get to be the pro-science person. Ha! That's not almost ever what they mean, though. Like, it would be so dumb to actually think that a living, growing fetus is not alive. Dead things don't grow. And so just kind of a good mental check is, if you hear someone making an argument that sounds really, really stupid to you, it's a good sign that maybe that's not actually the argument they're trying to make. They might be communicating it badly in kind of a dumb way, or you might be misinterpreting it into a kind of a dumb way. But either way, most people are not that dumb. There are exceptions. There are exceptions in YouTube comments and things like that. But for the most part, people are not that dumb. And so usually what they actually mean, but are not saying very well, is we don't know when a valuable person begins. It's a philosophical argument, that has to do with something's value or its nature, as opposed to what is it scientifically. So they say no one knows when life begins, and what they mean is no one knows when valuable life begins. If they say we don't know when a human begins, what they mean is we don't know when a human person begins. But just notice they're not saying it very well, and that happens all the time. I think this is one, like I pick on pro-lifers sometimes in areas that we screw up a lot. We talked about fetus tunnel vision yesterday, for example. That's not, pro-choice people don't typically have fetus tunnel vision. But here's a mistake that pro-choice people make more than pro-lifers, is they are super unclear with their rhetoric. And that makes our job harder. And that's why what I talked about yesterday about making clarity our responsibility and working really hard to ask clarification questions and rephrase what they said before we make an argument. That's why this is so important, because their rhetoric kind of sucks sometimes. Like, it's just so unclear, and you've got to like work really hard if you want to understand what they're actually trying to say, okay? So one of the greatest responsibilities we have as pro-life advocates is to make a convincing argument for the value of the unborn child's life. We need to help others understand how the human embryo deserves the same protection as you and I. And while there are different valid ways to argue this fundamental belief of the pro-life position, some approaches are more persuasive than others. This is something that we've learned a lot in the last 8 years of campus work. So at Equal Rights Institute, we use the equal rights argument because in our real life conversations, it is so much more convincing than every other personhood argument we've ever tested and tried. And we've tested several. In conversations, usually I find myself making this argument after trotting out a toddler, or after talking through bodily rights arguments, or whenever the other person says something that helps me understand they don't believe that the unborn child is a person with a valuable right to life. So you can make this argument persuasively and clearly by following 4 steps. So get out your pencils and pens, start typing. Here's step 1. Step away from abortion. Step 1 is step away from abortion. It's important to ask permission from the other person to take a short break from talking about abortion so that you can understand how they think about rights more generally. So when I say it, it sounds something like, can we put abortion on the shelf for a minute so I can understand how you think about rights more generally? We'll come back to abortion in a moment. And so notice something about that. I'm trying to be really clear in like the few sentences that I did. There's a lot going on. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm trying to indicate to them, I'm not trying to like change topics or avoid their tough question. I'm willing to get back to abortion. This isn't a dodge. I just like hit a thing. Okay. I'm not dodging. I'm just, I think this is going to be a helpful short tangent. Go with me, and then I promise, we'll jump back to abortion. So can we put abortion on the shelf for a minute so I can understand how you think about rights more generally? We'll come back to abortion in a moment. And then ask if they think equality is important. And specifically ask about the right to life. Write that down. Ask them if they think equality is important. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You could ask, do you believe in equal rights for all people? Or do you think equality is important? Or do you think it's important for people to have equal protection from violence? I like that one the most. Or do you think people deserve an equal right to life? Choose the one that feels the most comfortable for you. And then finally, acknowledge the common ground. If they say yes, which they probably will, almost everyone in the Western Hemisphere is on the same page with us, generally speaking, about equal rights. So when they say yes, point out that you agree. It's going to help you build that valuable common ground. Explain that you believe equality is really important, and whenever people's rights are not equally protected, you recognize that there is some sort of injustice that is going on against those people. You're all in Oregon. This language is going to be really helpful to you. They're going to be, oh, they're going to be mad that they like what you're saying, but you're going to be saying it the way that leftists talk. We did that on purpose. This is made to be as persuasive as possible to people who are not like us, to people who are on the other side of politics. So we're using a lot of language about equality and injustice, because I know from experience that's what gets their walls down and makes them, even if they're resisting. They don't want to like what I'm saying, but they have to like what I'm saying. because it's so good. So to emphasize the importance of thinking carefully about equal rights, you can talk about historical injustices stemming from bad thinking about equal rights. For example, you could say, I think it's important to think about equal rights because there have been instances in history when people have been wrongly excluded from equal rights based on things like race or gender or religion or disability. Okay, so that was step one. You step away from abortion. Step two, write this down. Sort who is in and who is out. Sort, we're gonna do a sorting process. Sort who is in and who is out. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do, this is a sub point, introduce the idea of an equal right to life circle. Okay, so it sounds like this when I say it. Let's imagine that there's a big circle and everyone inside this circle is in the equal right to life community. Everyone inside this circle deserves to be equally protected from violence or being killed. And then ask them who they think should be included in that community. And start with some obvious examples. We're not going straight to the unborn. That's not an obvious case to most people. It's certainly not most philosophers. So we're going to start with some obvious cases and build up that common ground. We're building up that rapport as we go. So we're going to ask, for example, start with talking about groups of adults. These are the most obvious groups. So sometimes I might say, I feel like the most obvious examples of who is in this community would be you and I. Do you think that we both have the equal right to life? Let them say yes. Okay, cool. What do you think about, like, are people of all races in the equal right to life community? They're gonna say yes, like, yep, definitely. Okay, I'm with you there, cool. What about people in wheelchairs? They're gonna be like, oh yes, definitely great. Okay, yeah, I'm with you. Definitely, it's really important. What about people on the autism spectrum? And they're going to be like, yeah, I think they're in. I'm going to be like, good, I agree. My wife and 2 out of 3 of my sons are autistic, so I'm glad that we agree on that. That's good. Okay, so we talked about some groups of adults. And remember, give them time to answer each question about different groups of people who should be obviously equally protected from violence. And acknowledge that you agree. Now, here's a cool, if you want to go advanced, here's a quick advanced tip. This is hard for some people to pull off. So if you don't track with me on this one, it's okay. Just tune me out for a minute. But we like to try to interject humor into our conversations when possible. Pulling the curtain back real quick, our staff, one of the things we did in the last month was we finalized for the first time our list of core values. We had a mission statement and like a strategy statement. We never had a core values list, and I became convinced that we ought to, because like if I get hit by a bus, there's certain things that are really important to me about ERI that I want to still exist. But figuring out that list is really, really hard. It took us like a long time, a lot of brainstorm sessions. And one of the things I noticed was like, you know, like we wanted ours to have like a very unique list. We want to like have a special list. And I'm reading like a list of like the top 100 corporations' core values, and they're all the same. Everyone's innovative, everyone's strategic, everyone cares about the customers. Like they're pretty common lists. So our list isn't super unique in general because we just want to accurately describe who we are. We do care about innovation. So we do have innovative, even though everyone has innovative. Okay, but we have one. I'm so proud of that we added that I've never seen on another list, which is humor. Humor is one of our core values at ERI, both internally and externally. So externally, that means that I try to make my speeches funny. Like I literally write jokes for my talks because this is a rough topic to talk about, especially with young people who have short attention spans. I want them to be engaged, and so I want to be funny, and I want to keep their attention. But also internally, we don't take ourselves very seriously. I don't know if you can tell that in this Zoom call already. I don't take myself, I think it's important, because who do you want to spend less time with than a philosopher who takes himself super seriously? I've been around those people. It's no fun. So we just want to be like really chill, and our staff has fun with each other like every day, and our staff meetings are super chill. So this is a chance to add some humor into your dialogue. You're talking about groups of adults that you can agree have equal rights. So maybe throw in like some hated celebrity. Like, what do you think about Nickelback? Like, do you think Nickelback should have an equal right to life, even like after like with all the music that they've made? Should they be in something like that? Or like, and I think Nickelback gets like too hard of a rap. I think the music's fine, but like everyone hates Nickelback though. You can pick whatever group, maybe if in your town, if like Dave Matthews Band is a hated group, and that's like one of my favorite bands. But a lot of people hate Dave Matthews Band. It's like you pick or a rival sports team, or you could just say ugly people. Should ugly people have an equal right to life? Or people who wear socks with sandals. No offense to anyone on the call who might maybe do that sometimes. I don't care. I'm just saying, ask kind of like a silly question, get them laughing. It builds up a lot of rapport. It brings their defenses down. It's so good. We've got a podcast more on this called Humor and Dialogue. Go check that out. And I've already booked a Christian comedian to come on later, and we're going to do a follow-up. And he's going to talk about how to be humorous and some of the, like it's going to build on the stuff that we've already made. So I'm really excited about that, but we haven't done that yet. Okay, so we've talked about adults. Getting back on topic. If you're not into humor, come back to me now. Okay, we've talked about adults. Now we're going to talk about newborns. This is a very important second group to talk about. What about newborn babies? Should they be inside the equal right to life circle? Do newborn babies get an equal right to life? Okay, going to ask them about that. And they're probably going to say yes. Cool, got common ground. Third, I want you to ask about squirrels. You might say, okay, this might seem like a weird question, but what about squirrels? Should we include them in the equal right to life community? Now, it's like this funny thing because you've been doing this back and forth. You've got all this common ground. You're asking about things like, okay, yeah, I'm with it. You're going back and forth, and you have to ask squirrels. And it's like, reach! And they're like, they got to stop and think for a moment, you know? They're like, And usually they'll say, I don't think so. Be like, yeah, I agree. Now, let me say, just pause. In rare cases, you will meet someone, there's a lot of them in Portland, who will say that they believe it is okay to kill newborn babies or squirrels, or they think that squirrels have an equal right to life. Okay, you will meet these people. I will talk about that before we jump to Q&A. But I'm not going to talk about that right now. Let's focus on the 95% of kind of normal people who just understand that squirrels are not equal, okay? I will come back to them. Okay, so we've stepped away from abortion in step 1. And then in step 2, we have sorted with them who is in and who is out. And we have focused on adults, newborns, and squirrels. Now step 3, write this down. Solve for X. Like an equation, solve for X. How much y'all want to bet that step 4 starts with S? Okay, so here's the example of how I am feeling really silly today. I don't know what's going on. Okay, so when I say this, it might sound something like this. There must be a reason why some things in the equal right to life community are in and why some things are out. So let's call that point of entry X. Like that thing that you get, that gets you in. Let's call that X. What do you think it could be? And a quick thing that I'll usually add is one thing we already know about X is that it cannot be something that's on a spectrum that some people in the circle have more than others. It has to be something that we all have equally because we're trying to explain the equal right to life. So someone's like, oh yeah, I think human intelligence. I think intelligence is the thing that explains their equal right to life. That's the thing that they all have in common. Okay, that's not going to do the job. Why? Because not all the people are equally intelligent. And if you don't believe me, then after this, I want you to jump to youtube.com. I'm going to click on a random video and then read the comments. And you are going to see that some people think better than others. And it's okay. They are persons. They are human beings. They have an equal right to life. But it's not because of their intelligence. Intelligence does not have to do with your value. Thank God for that, right? Okay. So I'll say, if they preempt this by asking you for your answer, feel free to give it to them. That's usually step 4 in this process. But I'm just saying, when we teach processes like this, like we don't do a lot of scripts and stuff because I don't want you to try to memorize something that you try to do like a robot with people. Like you're gonna have to kind of improvise and work with people. So if they well, what's your answer? Just give them your answer. And I'll explain how I do that when I get to step 4. Otherwise, help them test their answers. They're going to give you their answer, what they think gets you in, and you're going to help them test it and see if it's a good answer or a bad one. And spoiler alert, is probably a bad one if it's a pro-choice worldview on personhood, because their answer is probably going to fail one of two tests. And sometimes it'll fail both at the same time. That's when it's really bad. They will either exclude newborns from the equal right to life circle. They'll tell you a thing that you've got to have, like self-awareness, that newborns don't have, and now newborns are out. They've kicked the newborns out. So that, like, it fails the test. We already know newborns are in. We've already agreed. That was in step 2. We've agreed. They're in. So if their answer kind of kicks out the newborns, well, we know that doesn't work. Let's figure out another one. So they'll either exclude newborns or they will include squirrels. They'll say something really minimal, like sentience, like being aware of the world around you. And it's like, well, almost all the animals can do that. Now squirrels are back in. Do we really think squirrels should be in the circle? Okay, well, that doesn't really work. Okay, so you're going to help them test their answer, and you're thinking about newborns and squirrels. As my friend Trent Horn said, pro-choice definitions of personhood either include too many things, like squirrels, or they exclude too many things, like newborns. So their answers are going to fail one or both of these tests. There is one exception that only really advanced pro-choice people do, and I don't think we're going to have time to get into that today unless you really want to in Q&A, but it would take a while to unpack. But there is only one exception, and it's pretty rare because they have to be really philosophically sharp usually to do it. So don't worry too much about that. But we're reshooting this module this year. I will definitely be talking about that in that. But I think for sake of time, I won't jump into that today. I know for a second it's already 11:25. I definitely don't have time for that today. It's okay. So, and other than that, every example. So you're going to give them some time to work through this puzzle. You're going to help them test their answers. And people are going to be more likely to change their mind if they're allowed to work through it on their own. Try not to do all of the work for them. You're helping them. You're on the same team. This is not a you versus them debate. We're on the same team. We're searching for truth on this topic. And so you're going to think through all these examples. So if they say, I think you need to have the ability to think, to have like mental processes at all, to be in the equal right to life circle. It's like, okay, well, then squirrels would be in. Squirrels can do that. Squirrels can think at some minimal level, like they can store nuts and stuff, right? They might say, well, you need to have the ability to feel pain. All right, well, squirrels can feel pain. So now squirrels are back in. Do we want squirrels to be back in? Like most animals can feel pain. Oh, you need to be self-aware. Okay, I think that makes a lot of sense in some ways. I definitely value my self-awareness, but newborns aren't self-aware. So newborns would be out of the circle now. Okay, well, maybe it's something less than that. Maybe it's sentience. You guys got to like understand, you got to be having basic experiences. Oh, well, then squirrels are back in then, you know, because like, and I'm doing this a little bit faster than you would actually do. I'm showing you, here's the problems. So you're going to kind of go through this process. So you've stepped away from abortion. You've sorted with them who is in and who is out, focusing on adults, newborns, and squirrels. And then we solved for X, helping them test their answers to see if they have a squirrel or a newborn problem. And in case they haven't asked yet, it is time for step 4, share your solution. Share your solution. So when I do this, it usually sounds something like this. I think the only answer that works with what we already know from our sorting process is something like human nature. Something like human nature. It is the only thing that everyone in the community shares equally. So to bring abortion back into it, that is why I think embryos should be protected from violence. They have that same thing that the rest of us in the community share. So I think they must be included. So like given this way of understanding equality for people, like we're going back to abortion and showing like, I think that there was these obvious examples of who is in and who is not in the equal right to life community. We've already talked about it. We talked about humans. We've talked about newborn babies and squirrels. I don't think human embryos and fetuses are obvious cases of who is in. I already agree with that. But after all, I think this is one of the main reasons that people disagree about abortion, because it's unclear. I think we need to use the answer we found by looking at the clear cases to understand this unclear case. So I think what you need to have is something like human nature. Now, a quick note, and then I'm going to review. And I'll talk about people who bite the bullet briefly. But a quick note about my answer. Notice that I'm using the phrase something like human nature. I am doing that very intentionally. It is an intentionally vague answer, and I'll tell you why. So human nature is a philosophical term. It's different than biological humanness, like having human DNA. At ERI, we teach that you should say something like human nature, and it might sound confusing, but for now, you should know that we encourage you to phrase it this way. You don't need to overemphasize that it's something like human nature, but I don't think that you should say it is human nature. I don't think it actually is human nature exactly. Human nature is a close, imprecise way of saying something really philosophically complicated. And I'm intentionally trying to avoid going into the deep philosophical waters. Why? Because most people can't swim with me there. Okay, I've tried this. We had an outreach at UC Davis. It was the most intense outreach we've ever had. There was vandalism. There was a guy who looked like he was about to beat me up before he was finally pulled away. It got crazy. But like during that day, we were like, use that day to task, like, let's try just going straight to the deep waters. Partially, to be honest, because I wanted to show off. I wanted them to get a sense of how smart I am because I'm using these big words in this chain and I can explain it. And like everything was so intense, I thought like maybe this will help give me some of my advantage back. Like they're so angry. Maybe if I kind of mic drop a little bit of like philosophical rhetoric on them, maybe it'll help them back off. And it didn't work at all. It just distracted them. They would pick up on like one of the words and think I meant something else. And then we're talking about moral relativism, which is like the worst possible conversation I have at a college campus. Or they're just like not understanding what I'm saying. So it just gets all confused. So if I'm talking with a philosophy professor, I go straight there. But for most people, they can't handle it. And so it's actually a kinder thing to them to be a little bit vague and say something like human nature. And a couple of days ago, the group in Ireland asked, do you ever get people that ask, you said, hey, you said something like, what do you actually mean? And I said, you would think so, but almost never. Like, it's like they miss it. They're not listening that carefully. And so they just think you said human nature and they just kind of go with it. And a lot of them change their mind about abortion on the spot because I didn't like drag them into super deep philosophical waters that they're not ready for. So if you're super curious about the precise definition, I'm not going to get into it today because it would take me like a half an hour to unpack in a way that would be like really helpful to you and answer all the normal questions that come up. But we do have a module in the Equip for Life course on that. So if you want to get into it, we just put it out like 6 months ago. It's called an Advanced Philosophical Case for the Unborn. And if you don't have the Equip for Life course, then you should get it. You should go to equipcourse.com and get it. It's just really great. Okay, so to review, step one, step away from abortion, and then you're going to sort who is in and who is out, and then you're going to solve for X. You're going to help them test their answers, and then finally share your solution. Let me quickly just give you a couple of tips for when they bite the bullet, and then let's jump into Q&A. And I won't go deep into this because I've got a podcast on this that goes deeper. So if you're really interested, we do that. It's like we got like an hour-long podcast on this. But a couple of quick things. So when I say biting the bullet, what I mean is those people, those Portland people, those people who are like, maybe squirrels are equal, man, you know, or, you know, who's to say that newborns should have a right to life? Like maybe they just have a right to life because they're cute, but maybe we're wrong. Maybe we should not, maybe they shouldn't have the right to life until they're 6 months old or something like that. Like we get that about every day on a college campus. And so there's a lot of things that we'll do there, but I'll give you just a couple. One thing I'm going to do, this is super nice of me, okay? But this is, I think it's important to give them an out, to give them a chance to walk it back. Like I'm going to say like, do you really believe that? Or, and I'm not saying this in a snarky way, I promise. Like in real, it's kind of hard to do it really well here. But like, do you really mean what you said there? Or is this like, or is this you not wanting to abandon your argument? Like, so like when I do like a longer version of this, like the way that I often do this will be like, look, let's take a pause real quick. Let me tell you something that happens to me a lot of times. I don't know if this is what's going on with you right now, but I'll tell you, this does happen to me a lot. I talk to people, and sometimes they get into fight mode, meaning they're not really in truth-seeking mode. They're more like just defending their current view, and it's like a debate. And a lot of people like to debate, and it's kind of fun and intellectually interesting. It's just that's not what I'm doing. I'm not interested in that. I don't think there's going to be a winner or a loser at the end of this. Unless by the end of this, we both have learned some true things. I'm in truth-seeking mode. And so if you want to have it, sometimes when I'm talking to people who are in debate mode, they end up saying things kind of silly when they get cornered. When I make like a really good argument, and then they're like, oh, well, I've got to guard turf. I got to like make sure I don't concede any points. Sometimes they're even trained not to concede any points, like in debate class or something. And then they'll say things that are kind of silly that they don't really mean, but it's like they don't know what else to say. And if that's what's happening here, I just want to say, I'm going to give you a do-over. I'm going to like, we can rewind the tape. We'll pretend like this never happened. You don't lose any points with me. In fact, I'm just going to actually be impressed that you were willing to do that, because most people aren't. But like, I don't want to debate some fake version of you, some extremist version of you. I want to talk to the real you. What do you think? And if you're convincing me that I'm wrong about something, I'm totally going to tell you. I'm just going to let you know so you can really talk to the real me. So if this is you kind of in fight mode, let's like rewind the tape 30 seconds and try again. And I do that because I think most of the time when someone says newborns aren't persons or squirrels are persons, that's what they're doing. They don't really mean it. They're in fight mode. They don't want to lose. And they're saying something that's kind of stupid. And I'm doing my best to like save the conversation, because you cannot have a very successful conversation if they're just going to basically say whatever they think they have to say, cannot lose any points. So at that point, I'm going to pretty quickly graciously end what has become an unproductive conversation. I'll stop there. There's other things that we do too. Listen to the podcast. It's episode 1 of the Equipped for Life course podcast. You can find it. You can search for it on Apple Podcasts.
I took notes, Josh, of these things that you've said. Nice. Go and find these. So when we send out the resource email, if you're here, that means you registered and we have your email. So I will send you an email at the end of this week with all the little things that Josh, I've been taking notes on my phone that Josh said. Josh, I would like to know really quickly, though, I know Lois probably has some questions. How do you end a conversation that isn't successful?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so add this to your email list. There's an article I wrote on our blog called something like "How to End an Unproductive Conversation Graciously," something like that. It's probably like the link that I refer people to the most often in Q&As, like in webinars.
Unproductive conversation.
Yes, unproductive conversations. This is so important for self-care. So let me just do like a minute on this. A friend of mine, one of my best friends, an apologist named Jonathan Fitcher, said this thing so beautifully, I'll never say it better. So I'm just going to quote her. So he basically said, Christians have, no, how does he say? Christians have they make the common mistake, have the bad habit. Christians have the bad habit of trying to force feed arguments into people's mouths who don't want them. It's like, oh, that is so good. It's like, they're not hearing you, but like we keep on trying. Like I get into these things where like people are being really obnoxious and mean, but it's like, they're still there. And our Christian tendency, and I know not everyone on here might be Christians, that's okay. But just, I know Christians do this, I think, more than atheists do. We suffer from this thing. We just feel like we have to try for as long as they're willing to stand there. And then we'll let ourselves get abused by people sometimes. And I think self-care is really important. You need to take care of yourself so we want you in this for the long haul. We don't want you to leave the pro-life movement because you had a really bad conversation with a jerk. And there are a lot of jerks. And so this is where, by the way, the Bible verse that talks about, what does it talk about? Don't feed the pigs, but that's not it.
The pearls, don't throw your
pearls before swine. Thank you. Yeah. This is what it's talking about.
And then putting your seed out on the right type of soil.
Right. It's like you're just giving them more opportunities to attack you. So I will let someone be mean for a little while, and I'll try to, like, sometimes people just need to vent something out about some other pro-lifer or something that they think is true about me, but it's not. And then I can kind of come and be like, man, I'm with you. I'm totally against that. And they kind of like, oh, okay. And then we can have a real conversation. Okay, fine. I'm willing to take a little bit of abuse for a while and see if I can get things back on track. But at some point, all they're interested in doing is just being a jerk. Or if it's just like, I'm productive because they're just super closed-minded. I'm not interested in talking to closed-minded people for very long. What's the point? It's like playing tennis against a brick wall. You might get better, but they're not changing. The brick wall's not changing no matter how many times you hit the tennis ball against it. And so I'm looking for open-minded, thoughtful people who are, somewhat good-natured. Is basically what it is. And so, yeah, so I've got an article, and it basically says be honest about why you're ending it. Be gracious about it. Usually when I do it, it sounds something like, hey, well, I think we've figured out why we disagree, which I think makes this a fairly successful conversation. We disagree because you've hunkered down on this view that you think newborns are not persons. I really strongly disagree with that. I actually think it's a really offensive view, but that's your view, and I haven't been able to change your mind on it. I don't think it seems like you're going to change my mind on newborns. And so I think we're stuck. Because obviously we're not going to come to common ground on embryos if we can't agree on newborns. I think they're a more obvious case. And so I think this conversation's kind of come to its natural end, but I appreciate your time. This has been interesting, at least for me. I hope this has been interesting for you. I appreciate the chance to know more about you and your views. And I've got some other people that I should probably be talking to. And so have a nice day. It sounds something like that. It's honest, it's gracious, and I move on.
Josh is giving you permission to use this also on social media, everyone.
Yes. I did it recently. I had a horrible Facebook conversation recently. It was so bad. And at some point, I said something along the lines of, I've got answers, but I need to stop answering you because I can feel a temptation in myself right now to get really snarky and arrogant. And that's not the words that I use, but something along the lines of like, I'm feeling better than you right now. And I don't want that feeling. And this conversation is like, this is not going well. And so I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm sorry you're so offended by my views, and that was a friend. But like, it's like that happens. I know. And this is why I said yesterday, everyone's crazy in 2020. It's all that. But yes, do it on social media.
74 people in this room right now.
Yes, these people are great. Obviously,
I do want to say that Josh has really emphasized, which I love, because I don't think that there's enough of an emphasis on that, of the self-care perspective of, you can feel it really negatively impacting your emotion and your energy, which is not good long term. But also, I want everybody to remember the people that are witnessing these conversations. Not often are these conversations happening in like your Facebook message room where it's just you and one other person. Lots of times these are happening in comments. These are happening on the street, talking to your friends, not during COVID. And the thing is, people are like drawn to difficult looking conversations. We can't really look away. It's a reason people look at the YouTube comments, which you really shouldn't look at YouTube comments. Let me just put that out there right now. But the people that are watching those are also being impacted and learning things both about the pro-life movement and about the people that are supporting abortion rights. And what you want to do is not stay in a really difficult, damaging conversation long term, because you don't know what the impact is going to be on those other people. They may come away thinking, oh, well, the pro-life person couldn't really answer, so that's why they were there. Or like, who knows? There's any numbers of ways. It's not always going to come out like, wow, that poor pro-life person was being beat up verbally and abusive, like in their tone of voice. So that's another thing, is just remember that there are other people watching. And I think Lois has a bunch of questions. We probably have more than we can get through with how long Josh takes.
Okay, that's fine. All right, let's tell you another resource that I did listen, because this gets to that point and it's really good, but I won't embellish on it. But look up, it's like the most popular article we did last year is something about refuting pro-choice memes.
Oh yeah. Okay, everybody, because there are still people joining us. Welcome. You've missed the meat of this conversation, but again, we're going to record this. It's going to go up on YouTube. It's so good. I've learned a lot. But I am keeping a list of the things that Josh has mentioned that people need to look up, and I will send you links at the end of the launch, so after tomorrow's session. All right, Lois, questions?
Yes, so I do have a bunch of questions. I'm going to ask this one because actually this comes up more often than you would think. Josh probably doesn't think this, but this is from Donald. My Jewish neighbor claims that breath imparts life, as when God breathed life into Adam. His belief is that a baby is not alive with a soul until it takes its first breath. I've actually had non-Jewish people propose this as well. So how would you respond?
I've heard pro-choice Christians say the same thing. In fact, did you know that the Hebrew word for breath, which is nephes, you see it that's the reason. And so once babies can breathe on their own, then they have a soul. So I would say, it seems like that argument proves too much. So for example, I remember learning, so when we had, 11 years ago now, when we were pregnant with our first son, I went to 3 very interesting and mildly traumatizing birthing classes with my wife. And so a lot of you have been to things like that. And I learned something, though, for the first time. They talked about how there was kind of this growing movement of people who were not cutting the umbilical cord after the birth for up to like an hour after birth. These are like people who are very into like natural therapy. They might be like vegan or something like that. Maybe not, but it's like there's some people that are like, we are not cutting the cord until all of the good nutrients inside the cord kind of get into the baby's body. And then once it's useless, then we cut it. And so I've talked to people about you take examples like that, you think about like babies who don't breathe right away after birth. Think about the baby, this is why they slap babies on the butt, after they're born. They're trying to get them crying so they use their lungs for the first time. It can take minutes after birth. And so what about those babies? Are those babies not persons? This person has to bite the bullet at this point of view, yep, they're not a person until the doctor slaps them on the hiney and they start crying. It's that just seems like a really weird view. Really? This is
and then do you lose your humanness? Somebody that chokes and can't breathe anymore, or somebody that their heart has stopped or whatever, they're getting CPR, they're no longer breathing in and out.
It's pretty good. They've got an easy way to get out of it, but they might not be clever enough to do it. But just so you know, the way to get out of that would be what matters is that they once did it. They've crossed over this threshold. Now, even if they're in a temporary coma or something like that, they're in. They won't all be clever enough to make that move, by the way, but it happens a lot. And so I just feel
Donald's Jewish neighbor might be clever enough to get out of that one.
Yeah, so, maybe. So it'd be under this view, newborns are not persons until they cry after they're born. And that just seems like a really offensive view. Almost no pro-choice people think that. Is that really your view? Or do you think maybe that's the way God created the first human, and then he used a different method on the second human, and then after that, it was a different method for all the other humans, with the slight exception of Jesus. Things got a little bit supernatural there. But other than that, there's been pretty much a method. And I don't think that, just because God breathed into Adam, presumably a human adult that he had just formed and kind of kick-started his body into breathing, that means that from now on, babies aren't alive or persons until they breathe, unless you're willing to bite the bullet and just say all abortions should be okay. And most pro-choice people won't bite that bullet and say hey, every single, what if a mother is literally in the midst of childbirth and changes her mind and says, kill the baby with whatever means necessary before it's born and breathes for the first time? Because after all, it's not a person yet. It's only been breathing through the umbilical cord. It's a different thing. like they're going to have to bite that bullet. And I'll tell you, like, if they do, you've actually, I don't like the phrase won the conversation, but you've helped them. It is a good thing for them because they've gone from kind of having this inconsistent, comfortable pro-choice position to now being forced to have a consistent but uncomfortable pro-choice position, where they have to accept all the abortions to stick with their current argument. That's a win. That is a good thing for them. I'll stop there.
Okay. Great. So another question, Teresa, she asked a little bit early on, but I think it's still a good clarification. So I think we were talking about the step away from abortion, and she was listening yesterday about not asking leading questions. So if you ask somebody, do you believe equality is important? Is that a leading question?
I love this question. You're so paying attention, not only to yesterday, but like you are on the lookout now. Is just Josh live with this? No, that's a good question, but no, it's a clarification question. Okay. Clarification questions are awesome. Anytime you're asking them a question about their view, it's like, help me understand. Do you think A or B? Or do you think like, what is your take on this? That's a clarification question. Think of it like you're in detective mode. You're trying to learn more about their view from them as opposed to assuming anything. So instead of me assuming what they think about equality, I'm going to ask them a clarification question. What I'm not going to do is say something like, well, if you believed that what made you equal is sentience, then squirrels would now be in the circle, and wouldn't that be a crazy thing to believe? Like usually like the leading questions have like wouldn't, shouldn't, things like that in there. Like you're trying to lead them to like, can't we agree? Like the subtext is, can't we agree that smart people think something different? That's usually kind of the subtext of that question. But me just saying like, what do you think about equality? Or Kim, you know, or whatever the question was. That's a clarification question. Those are fine. You should use them a lot and avoid the arguments that have a question mark at the end.
Great, that's perfect. So I had a question about terminology. Mm-hmm. So this is, let's see, Pat is asking what your thoughts are about changing our name from pro-life to pro-abundant life.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask a different question. So I still need to read. There's a little booklet that that the head of CareNet has published. His name is escaping me. I can see his face right now, but his name is escaping me at the moment. But he wrote a little book on the abundant life phrase that I think he's the one really trying to make that a big thing, as far as I can tell. And I like CareNet a lot. I partners with CareNet in multiple ways. I'm speaking at the conference in a month and doing like multiple things for them. So I've got good relationships with a lot of people at CareNet. I haven't read the book yet, and so I guess I don't really understand the argument. Outside of, I think it's an attempt to kind of go away from, you know, the term pro-life has baggage on it. I definitely think that's true. That has been basically shown through multiple studies now. And I haven't stopped using the term pro-life just because I don't know a better option. But if I have one, I'm willing to, because I do think that baggage is a problem. But I don't know exactly what he means by abundant life. And there's a thing that he might mean by it that then means I'm not going to be for it. So let me tell you the thing that I want to avoid. But I'm not going to place this on the phrase abundant life because I don't know if this is what they're doing. But here's my concern. There's a lot of pro-life people now, well, it's not just now, it's been going on for a while, where they're trying to make the pro-life movement more sort of like PR friendly or something like that, which is fine. A lot of my work is sort of doing that same thing, but I think they're going too far. And what they're doing is they talk about like consistent life a lot. So I have a consistent pro-life position, or I have a consistent life position, which means I'm against abortion, I'm against the death penalty, I'm against war, I'm vegan, you know, and there's kind of this list of things going on. And the idea is that because of my view about life, I have the right views about all these different things. It's not just about abortion. And the problem to me is a lot of times I hear pro-choice people use this. Pro-choice people will be like, oh, I'm a more consistent pro-lifer than you. I mean, I think all the abortions should be legal, but I'm against death penalty, I'm against war, I'm vegan. So I'm like, I've got 3 pro-life things and you've only got 1. So I'm more pro-life than you. It's just become this like easy way to try to dismiss everything a pro-life person says about abortion. Let's not make pro-life about abortion. Let's make pro-life about anything related to life. And I think that's a mistake, but it's a well-meaning mistake. I think we should keep the term pro-life about abortion, but I think that we should be willing to talk about all those other issues. I'm happy to talk to someone about my views about capital punishment or just war theory or veganism or any of those things. I think they all matter. I just think that a lot of times what's happening is either pro-choice people are using this against whatever pro-lifer they happen to be in front of, or pro-lifers are using it against some other pro-lifer that they don't like, and they're trying to like one-up them. Well, I'm more pro-life than you because I am also vegan. It's just like, it just becomes this thing. So if abundant life is kind of doing that, I'm not going to use it. But it might be something else that's awesome. Roland Warren, that's his name. Roland Warren. It's a little book. I need to read it so badly, but so I don't know. That's the best I've got. Do you know more about what the abundant life term is supposed to mean?
I haven't had a chance. We've had a couple of comments about people referring to John 10 verse 10, and that seems to be the basic the basis of his explanation. So it's an assignment for both of us to read that. Yeah,
so I'm pulling it up now. I'm
okay.
Curious. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So if that's where it comes from, I still have no idea what it means when it comes to the pro-life issue. I need more information. That's probably why you wrote a book. But maybe some of you understand it and I'm just slow. But
all right, so Lois and Josh are going to research it. And Lois, let's get to another question. We're running out of time. We only have 6 minutes.
Okay, so
we can go longer if you want.
Thank you. Question from yesterday. That's another terminology question. So this questioner attended one of your conference sessions and asked about, you recommend that we use the term pro-choice rather than pro-abortion when we're in conversations. And his question is, isn't that a double standard that we're not allowed to call them pro-abortion, but they're allowed to call us anti-abortion rather than pro-life?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So the reason I use the term pro-choice is completely pragmatic. It is my goal if I'm in a conversation with a pro-choice person is I want to love them as well as I can. And that's going to mean different things in different conversations. But just take the conversations where I think the most loving thing I can do is try to change their mind about abortion. And that is a lot of them. But there are other cases where I think the best way to love them is to listen to them, to just hear them, because they've never had a pro-life person hear them before. Maybe it's sharing with them why I think there's this guy 2,000 years ago who walked out of his own tomb. So I've sometimes talked about that instead of abortion or followed a different, something that really matters to them. And so, but for the case where we're talking about the pro-life thing, my goal is to change their mind about abortion, and I don't think I'm going to change their mind about abortion while bugging them. Like if they feel like the most accurate term is pro-choice, and I keep on calling them pro-abortion, and every time I say that, they get frustrated and distracted. What has just gone up? A wall. It's just like I've built the wall for them, basically. And I get the counter argument. I know that pro-life people for like 30 years now have been saying, don't ever say pro-choice. Only say pro-abortion. Or some even go further and say, use pro-abort. Like you see that on Facebook a lot, which to me, frankly, just sounds like a slur. That just sounds bad. Sounds like you're just name calling. And that's not who we're supposed to be. But no, the idea is like pro-abortion is more accurate. Pro-choice is a weasel phrase. Everyone's pro-choice. We're pro all kinds of choices. We're just not the pro the choice to kill people. I get that. I'm with you. I agree. It's a vague phrase. The problem is pro-abortion goes too far on the other side of the spectrum and is also inaccurate to most people I talk to. Because pro-abortion, the way people hear it, doesn't matter what you mean by it. What matters is how they interpret it. The way they interpret it is like, you like abortion. You're pro-abortion. It's like, you're pro-smoking. Like not that many people are pro-smoking. I'm not pro-smoking. I'm pro the legal right to smoke, but I think you shouldn't do it. But they hear it like that, like you're pro-slavery. It's like, no, they're pro the legal right to have an abortion. The most accurate way to do this is with 2 hyphens. Pro-abortion-choice. Pro-abortion choice. So pro the choice to have an abortion. That's super accurate and fine. It's just super clumsy. And whenever I say it out loud, they're like they gotta like take a second to catch up. And maybe it's worth it. But like, yes, pro-choice is weighted a bit in their favor. And my thing is, again, is like, it's not a fair fight anyway, though. It's like when like a big burly guy goes into the ring with this like little guy and then like gives the little guy, I don't know, like, brass knuckles or something. It's like, but he's still got a huge advantage or something. It's like, okay, fine. I'm using the term that is going to be non-offensive to him. And yeah, I lose a little bit of rhetorical advantage there. I can handle it. And I can keep the focus on what I want to keep the focus on, which is the unborn a valuable person with equal rights? And does a woman's bodily autonomy trump those rights or not? The more I can keep the conversation on those 2 things, generally speaking, outside of like weird counterexamples, that's going to be my goal. And I've just seen too many times a well-meaning pro-life student that we've just trained walk onto a campus. They get the chance to talk to a flesh and blood pro-choice person. And it starts off. And the pro-life person is like, so what do you think about abortion? And they're like, I think abortion should be legal through the first trimester at least. And they're like, oh, so you're pro-abortion. And then they argue about terms for like 2 minutes. And then the person gets frustrated and walks away. And I'm just like, was that the best thing we could have done with that 2 minutes? Or like, is there something better we could have done? That maybe would have kept them there for, I can keep people here for like an hour talking to me, sometimes 2 hours. Those are the great conversations. And every single time it's because it's partly because I called them pro-choice. It's like, use the terms. I think it's just polite. I think it's fine for them to call us anti-abortion. I have no problem with the phrase anti-abortion. I think it is super accurate. The term that I'm not okay with, and I will call them out on it, is when they call us anti-choice. That's lame. Like, okay, I am giving you, I'm like not just moving toward the middle. I'm like really helping you out I'll fine, pro-choice, whatever. But anti-choice is such a lame straw man attack. I'm not against all choices. I'm against the people having the choice to kill people. And I will call them out and be like, no. So there are certain things where I will draw the line and be like, come on. Or like when they call it a parasite. It's just a parasite. I don't let them get away with that. We're stop. No. Let's talk about parasites. Let's talk about what parasites are. Like before we move on. But I don't think pro-choice is giving them too much credit. I think it's fine.